Guys, welcome everyone. And if you want to continue putting in where you're from, you're very welcome to. But welcome to our webinar part 4 on Radix concepts and the effects of childhood on pulsation in relationships. This is the 4th and last in our 4-part series that the Australian Radix Association has been really happy to present for the first time as webinars, and we hope that there'll be lots more. I'm Louise Wallace. I'm a registered psychologist. I'm a clinical nurse consultant in mental health and a clinical midwife trained in Radix Somatic Psychotherapy. I'm the director of Hawkesbury Trauma Counselling Centre based in Windsor, New South Wales. I'm honoured to be your host for today's 4th and final webinar on Radix concepts. Whether you're a practitioner, a student, or simply curious about the profound connection between body and mind, you're in the right place. A quick note before we begin on some of the housekeeping. The webinar should go for around 90 minutes, and we encourage active participation. Please chat with each other in the chat section. We would love your questions in the Q&A part of the webinar, which you will find down on the bottom right-hand side of your toolbar down the bottom, a section for that dedicated. And there'll also be some poll questions directed towards what's been useful and what you might like more of in the future. We're hoping to bring you lots and lots more webinars and snippets of information as we roll further along. It seems like this has been a great way to get information out to people, as well as, you know, the more traditional way of coming to workshops in person. So we're exploring key Radix concepts that speak to our life force, which is all a focus on the deep connection between our emotions, our thoughts, and physical experiences. By working with movement, breath, and body awareness, this approach helps us to release patterns, old patterns, heal trauma, and cultivate a more authentic and embodied way of living. Webinars 1, 2, and 3 can be found on the Radix Australia YouTube channel. Take a look and have a refresher on those key concepts, which will feed into tonight's webinar, but also the keynote speakers will reintroduce you to some of those concepts also tonight. So take a big deep breath, and I'm going to get the people involved in tonight's webinar to present themselves, starting with Brendan.
Thank you, Louise. Hello, everybody. I'm Brendan Turner. I'm a registered psychologist and Radix practitioner based up in Brisbane. And I am in private practice. I run my own practice from my home. And I've been working now for over 10 years with a range of clients from adolescents and adults. Sometimes I have children, but I don't really work in that space. But also extensively worked with couples and relationship issues, and have been trained in different modalities of couples counseling. So I'm excited to talk about this subject tonight. I also work extensively in the trauma field and work with complex trauma and religious trauma. So that's a bit of a specialization that I have going on.
Thank you, Brendan. Narelle, would you like to introduce yourself for people who may not have met you thus far?
Yes, I'm Narelle. I've got a private practice in Melbourne, in East Melbourne. I've been practicing Radix now for over 40 years. I'm a registered psychologist as well. And I mostly work with adults these days, both individually and in couples or relationship situations. And I think that's about it.
Yeah, and you're one of the co-pioneers of bringing Radix work to Australia. Yeah.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah. And Helen, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, hi, I'm Helen Stathis. I'm a psychologist in the NT. Been here the past 25 years, and yeah, I pretty much not many somatic trained people up here, so great to bring this up north and offer people this opportunity to work on a somatic level. So yeah, and a lot of people say to me, you know, whenever I do the somatic work, they go, "This is great." Yeah, so it's wonderful to be able to have not just the cognitive theories, but also to work somatically. And yeah, I do both. I work mostly with adults, and I've been trained for past, I guess, you know, started off with the standard psychology and knew that wasn't working too well, and then the last 20 or so years, 15, 20 years, gone into the somatic work and really finding that of benefit to myself and others. So yeah, really excited to be here tonight.
Nice to be able to offer a variety of modalities to people who come into your room. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Definitely.
Helen. And George, welcome, George. Have we got
Yes.
George?
Yep, I'm here. Yeah, hi Louise, thank you for hosting again. It's great, doing a great job. I've been practicing now, specialty in somatic psychotherapy, done quite a few trainings in that over many years. Been in private practice for 35 years and a registered body psychotherapist for 35 years, and that's a big part of my practice, if not the majority of it. And yeah, definitely specialize in trauma and complex trauma. And I work with pretty well any age group from 8 to 80 really, and get great results with kids and teenagers, and yeah, just love the work. And it's great to get all the people that have done all the intellect stuff and all the analysis and all the understanding, but the problem's still there in the nervous system, and it's great to be able to take them further and really clear that fight-flight response in them. And so, yeah, really enjoy it. And, yeah, look forward to today, contributing today.
Thanks, George. The poll questions that have been loaded up in this webinar series are really to let us know how this idea about the Radix concepts has landed for you and what you would like more of moving forward. Thanks to Narelle for being a co-pioneer of Radix psychotherapy in Australia. We're still wanting to know the place that it can expand to. I mean, it's already been here for 40 plus years, but there's certainly a lot more room for growth. It's in 4 states and the Northern Territory. So please take your time to respond to the poll questions and be as specific as you would like in the chat section, and we will follow that up and aim to deliver back some more information to you in the future. Very exciting and happy to be able to do so. Over to our keynote speakers, Brendan and Narelle, and
Great.
see you later.
Thanks, Louis. If we can just move to the introduction slide. Okay, so as Louise has just explained, tonight we are going to be looking at the effects of early childhood experiences on our pulsation as an individual and also our pulsation in relationship with another. So if we move to the next slide. So the first area that we're talking about tonight is attachment styles. And to start this conversation, it's really important to understand that the mind, brain, and relationships are actually part of one system. So neuroscience is now showing that when an infant is born, the brain hasn't fully developed yet. And the brain is actually developing in relationship with the caregiver. So all of those early experiences in infancy through childhood are being imprinted on the brain. And it's important to understand that, because that's what attachment actually is that early imprinting on the brain. And so an attachment is actually hardwired into the brain. And the 4 types of attachment that have been identified are shown here on this slide, and we're going to go through each of these in some detail. And you know, an important thing to understand when we're looking at a secure attachment, and also just relationships in general, is that there are some basic emotional needs that all humans have, that people need to experience with other people throughout their life, from infancy through to adulthood. And those 4 basic emotional needs are called the 4 S's, and they are to be seen, to be soothed, to be safe, and to be secure. So those 4 basic needs apply to secure attachment. And to explain them in more detail, being seen is about having an authentic and accurate perception of you that gives you a feeling of being felt by the other person and a sense of wholeness, and to be able to be together with another person without distorting your sense of self. Being soothed is really about when you're in a state of distress, that the other person who you trust is able to make you feel better or help you to feel better. So relationships are really fundamental to the mind in terms of a self-organizing process that helps soothe your mind and bring you back into a state of equilibrium. So relationships are really critical for that. And then safety is really about where this caregiver, the attachment figure, is not the source of terror, that they are actually going to protect you. And when you have that trusted relationship with a caregiver, this activates the social engagement system in your nervous system, which allows you to experience connection and trust with another person. And when being seen, being soothed, and being safe are all met, then that individual can experience security, a sense of being secure. And these create an internal mental model of security and experience of security. So if we talk more about a secure attachment in infancy, so this really means that the infant has been able to have their emotional needs met, that there's a sense of synchronicity with the attachment figure, with the caregiver, which means that the caregiver is present, sensitive. They can attune and resonate with the infant and develop that trusted relationship and attachment. And this gives rise to a coherent sense of self. So a coherent self is one where the individual feels like there's a wholeness, there's a coherence, and there's a connection with my own needs, and that I'm worthy of expressing those needs to the other person. And there's a sense of trust that they'll be seen by the other. So adults who have a secure attachment are able to build trust and also establish social bonds with another. Now, if we move on to the avoidant attachment style, so the avoidant attachment style really arises in the absence of connection, attunement, and repair from the caregiver. So in this case, where you have an emotionally unavailable or neglectful parent, the attachment system in the infant actually shuts down. So in this case, their needs are not being met, and that experience of not having their needs met so painful that they have to shut down to survive. So the self becomes disconnected. And in an adult relationship, the attachment style may manifest as being dismissive of your partner. The avoidant type may try to control their behavior and feelings to survive, and they withdraw from the other person under stress and shut down and shut them out, and might say, stay away, I don't need you. So that's the disconnected self. Then if we move on to the next one, the ambivalent anxious style. So in this case, there's been inconsistent or intrusive parenting. And what this does is the attachment system in the infant becomes revved up, and they struggle to be able to calm that down. And so this inconsistent and intrusive caregiving causes confusion for the infant. And so they might begin to then experience anger, but also rejection of their caregivers, and may have this confused sense of self where they ask for help when they don't need it, and feel uncertain and full of doubt, and general confusion. And in adults, this can manifest then as a preoccupied attachment style, so overthinking, excessively expressing emotions, experiencing intense negative moods, and also craving of intimacy from their partner. And finally, we have the disorganized attachment style. And so this style really is a result of severe abuse and neglect by the caregiver. And this severe abuse and neglect or frightening behavior in the caregiver actually causes the infant to have these contradictory drives of wanting to approach and also avoid the caregiver to make themselves safe. So the survival brain, on the one hand, is saying to get away from the caregiver who's the source of terror, but on the other hand, the attachment system is wanting to move towards the attachment figure for comfort and safety. And so there's these two opposing drives that cause pathological levels of dissociation in the individual, and this fragmentation of consciousness and fragmentation of the self. So this individual has, severely limited capacity to be able to communicate their needs, to regulate their emotions, to be able to navigate relationships and create social bonds. Is there something you'd like to add there, Narelle, before we move on to the next slide?
Yeah, so two things really. One is that I think it's really important that Alan Shaw, for example, in neuroscience, has pointed out that this attachment pattern usually got established by the time a child is at least 2, and it all happens through the right brain or through the non-verbal aspects of relationships. And I think that's really important in relation to tonight when we're talking about Radix and the somatic approach, because it happens through tone of voice, it happens through touch, it happens through all the non-verbal ways that you relate to somebody. It's not a verbal thing. That the left brain doesn't start to kick in until after the child is 2. So I think that's really important to consider. And the other one is that I think it's easy when we start to think about attachment styles as, we can think of ways that you might work with it, say in psychotherapy. So for example, with an avoidant attachment pattern, most people would recognize that want to try and encourage somebody to sort of reach out and connect more in a vulnerable way, particularly, you know, if they want support or connection. But often this requires sort of sub skills that we often don't think of, I think. So it's not simply asking somebody to sort of, you know, reach out and connect more. And I was just, again, wanting to sort of demonstrate this a little bit with an example. So if you go back to this idea that, you know, that you have an avoidant person and you want them to sort of feel more comfortable about reaching out to another to get support or to connect. There's many different ways that that might not be possible for them. First of all, they might not even recognize that they have that need as an adult. They may acknowledge the need, but not let that desire sort of build in them. Like in Radix in previous webinars, we've talked about, you know, there's a sort of a charge that has to build in the body to enable you to do things, and they may not let that charge of the desire to connect build, or they may let it build but have difficulty supporting the expression just because they haven't let the energy come into their arms or their legs, their arms to sort of reach and their legs to walk towards the other, and they seem like really basic skills, if you like. And if you watch little babies, they have those skills and you see them developing in them. But as adults, if they've grown up, say, in an avoidant attachment style, we often have to go back to those real basics and teach them and encourage them to develop. So we could probably say more as the thing goes on, but just thought it was important to talk about that.
Mm. Yes, the very important point about the right brain, and the imprinting that occurs with attachment is actually on the right brain, which is all to do with emotion regulation and social relationships. So it's critical to recognize that we need to be able to use a therapeutic approach that targets the right brain rather than working just on the conscious thinking, rational left brain side.
Yeah.
Thank you. The next slide, please. So following on from what Narelle's just discussed, it's important to know that it's actually not the attachment that you had as a child that determines how it manifests in adulthood, but rather the actual work that you do. And, you know, Radix work actually helps people to move towards a secure attachment and helps to rewire the right brain to help the individual to develop a sense of self that's more coherent and secure. And Dan Siegel's work in this space is very important to highlight. And he has come up with this concept of a coherent narrative. And Siegel's work actually discovered that it's how you make sense of your life that is more important than what actually happened to you and the traumatic experiences that you may have gone through in childhood. So it's through the process of creating a coherent narrative that you can begin to understand how past experiences have shaped you, and to develop the capacity to respond thoughtfully rather than reacting automatically from old patterns. So that's the idea of a coherent narrative. And if we go through those points there on the slide, if in developing a coherent narrative, you'll be able to talk about your life in a way that you can describe how you feel in your body, your sensations, your emotions, your perceptions and thoughts. So that is what he refers to as vertical integration. So you're able to describe what's going on at all of those levels. You can talk about a particular event that's happened with a balance between emotion and thought. And so this is horizontal integration between the left and right hemispheres of the brain, as we just described. being able to reflect on your life without ignoring the effects of childhood or blaming your childhood for your present way of functioning. And also to discuss traumatic events without becoming too rigid or chaotic, being able to stay regulated, and being able to warmly relate to others and have a strong sense of self and not lose yourself in that process. And also just to be able to generally accept life's uncertainties. So did you want to add something to that about a coherent narrative, Meryl?
I was just thinking on reflecting on your life without ignoring effects of childhood or completely blaming. There's an interesting article, it's pretty old now, written by a couple of TA therapists, and it's called The Four Stories of Psychotherapy. And they say that the first story is a client comes in and says, oh, you know, my parents were wonderful, life was really good. There was nothing bad that happened to me. Excuse me, I don't feel so good, or I'm feeling depressed and I wonder why that is. And the second story is you start to uncover things about your life, and so you go into sort of a pain story, if you like, or an angry story where that overshadows everything, and you know your life was shit, and everyone was terrible, and your parents were awful, and then the third story is that you start to develop a little bit of awareness about yourself, and well, in the TA scene, they called it your script. You start to recognize some of the patterns that you've developed over time and start to take some responsibility for it. And in the final one, you actually start to recognize that given all these experiences you had, both good and bad, there actually are some really good things that have developed from that that you can feel proud of. So I think it's quite interesting that they saw it as a progression, and you often see that with clients when you're working with them. So it's important often to hang in till you get to those final stages.
Yeah, it's a process to develop a coherent narrative, isn't it? It's not.
Yeah.
It's time.
And I think the first point he makes is, you know, people talk a lot about the reptilian brain, and it's sort of when he says vertical integration, he means that, you know, you've got all these sort of reactive sensations and experiences that, you know, you don't have a lot of control over. And then you've got your thinking brain, and you're integrating those. That's why he calls it vertical integration. That neither one dictates. So if we go back to the attachment patterns, you know, it's not the avoidant attachment where you live in your head and dismissive of everything and you ignore your feelings, and you're more animal-like responses. And you're also not in the anxious attachment where the more reactive responses, unconscious things are sort of running you, and you forgot to think. So there are ways to sort of relate it back maybe to attachment as well.
Yeah, and Radix helps facilitate that vertical integration, doesn't it? Because we're working bottom up. So we're working with the body, we're working with the unconscious, we're working with the survival brain and survival responses, and facilitating that integration into consciousness. Yeah. It's a very powerful way to work.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of Radix is about integrating thinking and feeling, you know, or as Chuck called it, you know, feeling and purpose. But yeah.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So what we're going to do now is bring this information into the context of relationships, and to talk about pulsation in relationships. I'll just start by reminding people what pulsation is, because if you haven't attended all of the webinars, you may not have had that information. But you can go back and watch the previous webinars, as Louise said, to get a more detailed explanation of pulsation. Narelle covered that in our first webinar. But essentially, pulsation is the flow of the life force. So it's the flow from that goes into the center of the body and then out to the periphery and back again. So it's about the life force coming into the core and then out to the periphery, out into the world. And so when we're talking about in-stroke and out-stroke, and it's important to understand the in-stroke is about coming in and charging up the individual, and then the out-stroke is about going out and discharging and being able to come out into relationship with another. Okay. So when we look at pulsation in relationships, we have pulsation that's occurring within the individual, and then also pulsation occurring at the level of the relationship between the two individuals. And when there is a mismatch between each individual's pulsation, this can result in issues within the relationship and relationship dissonance. So that's about that mismatch. And having an understanding of each other's pulsation can help to address some of those relationship issues and work to facilitate more of a flow in the pulsation in the relationship. And therapy helps you to be able to accept yourself and take charge of who you are and be able to contain some of the reactivity that occurs in a relationship. So that emotional reactivity can begin to be contained and can help to facilitate resolution in the relationship. Both partners need to have a sense of self that is separate from the other. And they can do this by sustaining charge within their own body and containing that charge, learning about that through Radix work, rather than all of the charge being with just one partner in the relationship. So both partners need to have the capacity to contain charge. And they also need to be able to discharge in a manner that matches the intensity of the discharge of the other person. So they're able to stay in contact with themselves and stay in contact with their partner while allowing discharge to occur. And finally, there needs to be, well, when there is a lack of boundaries, then a lack of boundaries or separateness within each individual in the relationship, this can result in overwhelming each other or feeling overwhelmed by their partner. So boundaries and separateness are very important as well in healthy pulsation in the relationship. Narelle, would you like to add that?
Yes, I think there are a couple of things. When we look at the rhythm pulsation, we're sort of looking at the rhythms of connection, really, and the rhythm of connection with yourself and the rhythm of connection with the outside world or another person. And we look at where is the energy in the body, where is the charge in the body? Is it distributed throughout the body, or are there sort of areas of the body where there's more of a pulsation? By a pulsation, I mean there is that easy in and out flow. Or how much of an energy charge can someone tolerate before they start to dissipate it? And as you said, the capacity for discharge. And as you indicated, Brendan, it's like each individual has a pulsatory pattern that they've developed over time. And then, of course, every relationship has a pulsation pattern. And I was thinking I could give an example of, just a brief example of a couple that I worked with, and we can keep coming back to it because we can come back to it in terms of Radix character, but also attachment. But if I stay with pulsation itself, this couple were a professional couple. They were both accustomed to being seen as competent and intelligent. And both were in their own way guarded about letting anyone be close, and were very uncomfortable with expressing their feelings. Haley was more sort of contained, and Bob was more of a dreamer. And as a couple, they were full of contradictions, but they were committed to trying to create a marriage that was more expansive, where they both could grow and change. In sessions, there was very little, I'm just jumping around here from the whole discussion. In sessions, there was very little ease in the pulsation between them. There was not much sense of a flow. They were both very cautious around each other. And so in this session, Haley came in reporting that Bob was aggressive around home. And when I inquired what she meant by this, she said, if he has a bad day at work, he comes home and thumps the paper or bangs the door. He's never been violent towards her, and so she didn't have any fear of that. But she wanted him to come home calm and even-tempered. When I asked her what she felt when he was aggressive, she reported that she simply shut down. And I asked her to demonstrate what she meant by this. She tightened her mouth, clenched her toes, breathed in and held her breath on the inhale and stiffened. And she said that when someone does something like that, she doesn't, she shuts down. And she says to herself, I can contain myself, why can't he? So in this session, I decided to have Bob walk around and become very noisy and very loud. And he was banging cushions and shouting. And I then had her exaggerate how she pulled all her energy in and became hostile in her head. And then I had her stand and ground her feet into the floor and relax her knees and shake her body a bit, and encourage her to breathe into her belly and her chest and begin to fling her arms around in the air a little, very gradually and soft to start with, and then much stronger and more powerfully. And as she did this and found that she was getting encouragement from me to sort of come out and do this, she began dancing and began singing. And suddenly she was aware that she wasn't much aware of Bob banging the cushions and shouting. And in fact, he'd become quite distracted by what she was doing and stopped doing it. He started laughing and started enjoying her, and encouraged her to dance even more expressively. So that was an example, I think, where in a couples session, I decided to play with the pulsation of the two couples. One thing a lot of people may have done would have been to try and calm Bob down. But that I don't think would have enhanced the relationship between the two people, and that she needed to become less contained. It wasn't about calming him down. She needed to find a way to bring her energy out. And he, in fact, really enjoyed that. And if we go back to early attachment sort of situations, what he said afterwards was that his mother had always been sad and miserable and uptight, and he'd felt that, you know, it had always been his job to have to sort of bring her out more, if you like. And so it was actually an enormous relief to him that she was able to be a bit more expressive. Anyway, I'm sure people have got questions about that, but I just thought that's a way of just putting it in action, if you like.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that example, Narelle. I think the next slide will be good to go through to give people a bit more of a deeper understanding of what we're talking about, by bringing in some of the Radix characterology and talking about how we conceptualize character in Radix.
Yep.
And it's important to understand that attachment styles don't match Radix characters, but there is a bit of crossover where one particular Radix character might have one or more of the attachment styles featured in it. So we'll talk a little bit about how they might relate to each other through this discussion. But if we look at the basic character structures of fear, pain, and anger, it's quite helpful to actually understand these, because it can help you to be able to understand your partner and these relationship dynamics in more detail, be able to help you navigate relationships. So we talk about a continuum from soft to rigid, and that people's character styles will fit somewhere along that continuum, with from one end, soft being the individual who doesn't have a strong sense of their body and their boundaries, to rigid, who is quite strong in how they hold their body, and their cutting off of their feelings and emotions, and being outwardly action focused kind of individual. And so a softer structure might want to sit around and analyze their feelings, or think about them in detail, and be on ChatGPT asking questions about it and intellectualizing everything, whereas the more rigid person might want to be out doing something, running around the block, going to the gym, or doing something like that, to give you an example of the contrast between each of them. But if we, it's also important to mention that there are paired feelings with each of these structures. And as we go through them, we'll talk about how if one of the feelings is blocked, then the paired feeling is also blocked. So if we look at the example of an anger structure, firstly, that's on the rigid end of the continuum, this person is blocking anger. Okay, so they're limiting the outstroke, which means the out breath, the discharge process, and they tend to be more focused on action and outward activities rather than their internal world and internal experience. And the paired feeling with the anger structure is love. So if anger is being blocked, then their capacity to experience love is also being blocked. And how that might manifest in a relationship is the anger structure might have lots of energy and love to use their energy. They might have a fear of being too much for others. And they might hold back from expressing their feelings because of this, and may, hold back and build up until they explode. And they tend to avoid their own feelings and put their energy into their partner's experience and making sure their partner's taken care of. Do you have anything to add about the anger structure, Nora?
No, that sounds good.
Good.
I was going to come back to the couple that I just spoke about and talk about what I saw each of them as in terms of structure. So maybe just do it all and then I'll come back. Yeah.
Righto. So I mean, the anger structure relates more to that avoidant attachment type, doesn't it? That's how you would see it at times, anyway.
No, I think an anger structure could be either. I mean, they could be an anxious attachment because they're frightened they're going to be too much, and if they bring their energy out, that's going to be destructive either to them or to the relationship. And I think they can also be avoidant, in the sense of being over contained. Yeah.
Good. So at the opposite end of the continuum, we have the fear structure. And so this individual is blocking fear. And this tends to be a person who has experienced trauma or hasn't had their needs met developmentally at a very early stage of development. And so this person is limiting the in-stroke. So they're more inwardly focused and less able to take action and be able to have build enough charge in their body to be able to have a discharge and to be able to take action in their lives. And the paired feeling with this structure is trust. So if someone's blocking fear, then they're also blocking the capacity to trust and deepen trust in their relationships. And so in a relationship context, this might come across as an individual who doesn't have enough charge and energy in their lives, may be tired and exhausted all of the time, which limits their energy for intimacy and sex in the relationship. And this individual needs to be able to have enough charge to have contact with the other individual in the relationship. And then finally, just quickly to talk about the pain structure, which is somewhere in the middle, where the individual could have features of being soft or rigid, depending on the individual. And this person is blocking pain. So they're limiting both the in-stroke coming in to themselves and the outstroke going out to the other. And if the person is blocking pain, then they're also blocking the capacity to experience pleasure in their lives. So this kind of individual in a relationship context might be grinding away in life, aiming to achieve their goals without actually experiencing much pleasure along the way. They have high ideals and expectations of how life should be. They will postpone pleasure for the achieving of goals and focusing on achieving goals, and have unrelentingly high standards. And so, they've got this enduring kind of quality to them as an individual, grinding away, and they may have difficulty staying in contact with themselves and also their rhythm in contact with the other individual.
And I think the pain structure more likely has a sort of avoidant attachment pattern, and the fear structure could have either an avoidant or an anxious attachment. I don't. It depends on the early circumstances. Yeah.
Yeah. And the fear structure could have a disorganized attachment style.
Yeah. Yeah. In terms of the little example I gave earlier, Bob, the guy in the relationship, I saw as a fear structure with a strong overlay of pain in his upper segments, which some people might find a bit interesting, in that I said that he would come home and he would, slam the door and throw a cushion or something. But that was because he couldn't tolerate much charge in his body. It wasn't because he was necessarily overcharged. The Hayley I saw much more as an anger structure. She was very contained. Her body was quite rigid and her muscles were quite tight. But if you gave her permission, she could become very expressive. But she needed that permission to become expressive. So she was an anger blocking structure, which is why she would think to herself, I can contain myself, why can't he? Whereas in fact, he was much more of a fear structure. And I think a fear blocking structure in Radix. And I think it's important to make that distinction, because people often get that confused. They think that when they're working with clients, if the client's very reactive, they think that anger is the issue, but usually it's fear or pain. Whereas the people who struggle the most with connecting to their anger and maybe expressing their anger are the people who will be very pleasing. They'll spend all their time pleasing and accommodating. And so you have to work harder to help them connect to, the so-called negative feeling of anger to bring it forward.
Yeah. That's great case study. And I think that that's the main content that we wanted to cover, Louise, so we can go into a discussion now, if you like, with keeping this slide on the screen for people who want to talk about this more.
I don't know. I'd actually like a bit more. I was getting so much energy. It's like, don't stop here. Yeah, absolutely. And let's go straight to the reflective team. And I'm curious about what that was like and what that brought up for the clinicians who work with relationships and character styles in session with a childhood understanding of developmental needs. So George and Helen. Helen, would you like to lead us in?
Yeah, thank you. For me, I was really focusing on what I think Narelle was mentioning around the boundary issues, or the enmeshment that, I've seen that a lot of that in relationships, so this kind of enmeshed pattern that couples can get into, or blurring of boundaries, and how to work with that, and it seems to me like there's I know there's kind of a buzzword, but kind of codependency type stuff and things. So for me, just drawing more further into how I work with that. And I kind of worked with people like fear blockers often end up with, just generally speaking, anger blockers. They seem to attract each other. And it's that probably the opposites attract type thing. And so often you find, I found as well that, working with an anger blocker who's very much, the pleasing type, people pleaser, and not expressing their needs and often getting angry. So often working a lot with, what they're always, drawing more on that kind of working on their self-contact. And I think for both of them, both of them are lacking self-contact. So it's really working with both of them to work with the pulsation to get them to basically come out. And for the anger blocker, to really have that permission. I think it's really important, to give them a lot of encouragement and permission to go, come on. And often I think I work a lot, we might not talk about this, but I work a lot with the sound. I got someone to make a lot of sound today, being an anger blocker, and she really enjoyed it. Like, what I think they're all saying before about, oh wow, can I really make that much sound? I said, yeah, go for it. And just, like she was, running away, and just getting her to breathe more, focusing on her out breath, because she was she just in-stroked a lot. She was just very, very contained anger, I think, a lot of anger structure. But she had a lot of fear too underneath. So there was this sense of, being scared to go in. But just so wonderful for her to be able to, get her to push out with her legs, make some noise, and focus on the out breath. She said, I feel so good after that. She felt I did a bit of discharge work with her as well, and she just came more in contact with her body. And she goes, well, I've never felt my body, like I've done years of therapy, I've never felt my body. Like, wow. So it's great to be able to offer this approach to help people to really connect to their body, sometimes for the first time, and simply working with sometimes breath, pulsation. And then she just said, yep, I can go home now and tell my partner what I need. So it wasn't that simple, but, it was a simple kind of, obviously, step by step. But she felt like, is it that easy? But simply because I think she was just getting in contact with her body more, and that because she lived so much in her head so much, which a lot of us do, she just was so out of contact with her body that, she kind of just, I felt my body, I feel so heavy, like I've got a body, so it was great for her to feel that. So in relation to what happens to her in her relationship, she kind of doesn't feel she can speak. She's got all this trauma from her past stuff saying, no, you can't do this, can't do that. So from that kind of intervention of being her more embodied, I think she then had that sense of container that she can start to just tell him a little things, and make a joke of it. And similar what the role was saying, sometimes she just goes into her head too much and says, oh, she looks at him, what's he thinking, and then she's heading it. So when she just felt like she could breathe, and then we came up with an intervention, simple, like, oh, maybe just make it fun, poke him in the belly or something and just say, oh, hey, how are you going? Are you okay? And she goes, can I do that? And she said, I'll experiment with that. So simple stuff around that she can just do little things when she's stuck in her head, like thinking about what he's thinking, and codependency, the thing that happens to a lot of us, like to actually, when she felt more embodied and her pulsation was flowing better, she just had more capacity to think, yeah, I can do these things. So yeah, I think just wanted to share that was a good case that I worked with recently.
And that's a really good example of somebody working without judgment about themselves and allowing their process to be what it is, in a way, isn't it? There's no right or wrong. It's really what's happening. And that can be a fundamental difference with Radix work, is we're not so interpretive per se. We're not doing the analysis per se. We're really observing and facilitating with the structure and the pulsation rather than the narrative.
Mhm.
Narrative's important, but it's not the focus. Yeah. George, how would you add
Yeah,
in?
exactly, Louise. That's exactly what I was thinking. It just leads in beautifully to what I was thinking as we were listening to this whole beautiful, fantastic presentation. That Radix is, non-narrative. That's the beauty of it, and the beauty of that is that it allows access to the inner child. And so I just love working with the inner child of people, because as the session gets deeper and deeper, and people get more embodied, naturally the nervous system of the inner child starts to show up. And if the client's willing to be vulnerable and take the risk as they build trust in you, then you see that inner child and its needs and what it missed and what it needed, and in those early years, and then you can actually provide it and allow that nervous system to heal, and then it filters into the adult as well. And so it's just beautiful too, which is why I love doing this work. It just goes so deep, and I don't think anything else does this in that I've ever experienced. The fact that we're working with the charge level, we're working with movement and touch and sound and expression, and that's all, like Narelle said, all non-verbal, all happened. It was all set in those first few years before the intellect actually can start to deal with it. And rather than the intellect building on top and leaving all that alone and covering it up, we help tease that out and bring the charge to where it needs to be in the body and through the nervous system. And it's wonderful to see people come alive then when they do that and take the risk. And with the relationships we're talking about, you could say, like Helen said, opposites attract. You could say opposite charge levels attract. In people, when you see that the couples and people, what their partner has is normally what they're trying to bring out in themselves, and so they attract each other because they love what the other person brings to the partnership. But it takes a risk, and you've got to take that risk to break that solid identity that was a defense, to open up, be vulnerable, and then allow the charge to balance out between the two. So yeah, it's just great work, and it's non-narrative. That's the beauty of it. Yeah,
It's a different narrative, isn't it, in a way? It's like a polyphony of sensory movement that has its own narrative and body language, to borrow an older term. But in some ways, it's like reorienting people to the function of their body. That gets lost if there's not a secure attachment in early development. So that's, I think, where we end up spending so much time on relationship to self. I'm curious whether from that, in sometimes in chemical dependency work, we work with someone whilst they work out their issues. They're still in therapy. When someone's working in relationship to other, they're also still working with themselves.
Yeah.
Who'd like to speak to that? That's tough.
Yeah. Well, I think what we're talking about in Radix is that there's this sort of there's connection with yourself and there's connection with the other person, and ideally you've got a flow between the two. And we, for a variety of reasons, we lose it. We either lose our connection with ourselves, or we lose our connection with the other person, or some mix in between all of those things. And I think that's why relationships are so challenging. I was thinking of another example of a session that stayed really strongly in my mind it happened years ago, and it was a couple who came, and the presenting issue was around sexuality. And they both agreed that the problem was the woman, that she was reticent around expressing her sexuality, and her partner wanted her to express it more. And again, one of the things I like about Radix is that, we are thinking in terms of the pulsations of the people and their character structures. And anyway, over time, I realized that I thought she was more of an anger blocking structure, and that what she needed was permission to be more expressive. And he was probably more of a fear, pain blocking structure. And so in this session, the rooms I had at the time was a long room. So I suggested that she stand at one end of the room and he was at the other. And then I said I wanted her to run and leap into his arms. And she sort of went, but said, okay, there was a sort of an excitement about it. And so she did that. And interestingly, when she did that, he froze. And the whole story shifted because it became, he then said that he was really frightened of her energy. It was overwhelming, and he doubted, he was really honest, he sort of doubted his capacity to be able to meet it. And so the whole session shifted to then building up his capacity to tolerate more energy in his body and to deal with that issue. And so I think that's another interesting example of how, and I was thinking about that today when I was thinking about that example, and I thought, well, we probably would have got there probably if we'd been talking, but we got there so much faster by just getting her to do that. And I had confidence in doing it because I could see that she had all this energy that she felt was going to be overwhelming, and she just needed a lot of permission that we built over sessions to sort of let it come out. And then anyway, so I think that's an illustration of the complications of those sorts of things,
Yeah. I want to go back to the reflective team for a minute, and I'm curious because relationships are difficult. They're complex. They're like thousands of millions versions of a relationship. Who's going to do this work to understand their developmental and how their early years affects their pulsation and their relationship? Who's going to do this work?
Question, isn't it?
What sort of people does this work? What are they experiencing that brings them to this work, do you think?
I think, well, what George was kind of going in before around the early childhood, and I certainly kind of, or the inner child, and yeah, like you said, he wants to go there because a lot of people, why do I want to go back there to my pain, to my distress, my sadness that I felt there? And it's always reminding them that, you know, there's healing in that inner child that was so lost and so abused. And so, yeah, a lot of work on that and just kind of working with the pulsation in that developmental level, which is what we're talking about, on the mat. So it's interesting how we kind of work with the inner child and develop the flow better, you know, so she pulsating better in the body at the end of it, hopefully, getting rid of some of those blocks and then feeling more alive while we're working with that little girl or boy that was so traumatized. So it's freeing up, you know, it's doing both, which I find really, really rewarding. Yeah.
What about you, George? What do you?
Yeah, well, I notice I don't work with a lot of couples, but the ones I've worked with, when they come in, there's normally it's one partner that brings them in, and then I have to. I always ask, I've got to see you individually as well to see that, to see how they relate to themselves, separate from their partner. But it's normally the commitment. The more aware they are of themselves, and the more they're committed to making the marriage or the partnership work, that's what brings them in. And it's tough because they want it to work, and yet something in their defense system is holding them back from. And again, it'll go back to childhood again. Some pattern there that was in pain, and they covered it up, and they're afraid to go there. And normally they'll start, and then when they realise, whoa, I've got to be this vulnerable, and one will disappear and never come back often. But if they stick with it, yeah, it's amazing. Those that have stuck with it through the difficulty and the ability to face and feel the vulnerability and the pain they blocked off, and where they pulled up all their charge and allowed it out. And normally what happens is the other partner is deeply moved, and that touches them. And then you see them at the end come together beautifully and really closer together, because they understand each other better, because they cover up that childhood part so well that the partner doesn't even see it. Long term, they do. Over many years, they'll notice the pattern. And if they don't react to it and just gently point it out, and then they come in and get it worked on, then yeah, if that partner really loves that person, they stick with it. And then eventually it breaks open, and it's wonderful to see them get back together again. And yeah, it doesn't happen often, but when it does, it's really, really touching. But something has to keep them there.
Yeah.
There's something better in there than just what the pathology shows up, you know, what they show up, which is the childhood defense. So, and if they stick with it, they do break through. But yeah, it's not easy, and they have to be vulnerable in ways they normally probably never have been.
And I think what happens too is, like with the Radix work, you get into a much deeper feeling, right? So, you know, when you're sitting in a chair work, like, you know, people start to cry, or whatever, but they don't. A lot of them will block off, won't they? So the beauty of the Radix works is that the feeling that they really will get into that deep, deep sobbing, which, you know, is hard, but is needed for health. And so many often people kind of get after that, a bit of a dopamine release, like, oh, you know, I'm exhausted, but I'm like, feel better, because they've had that real discharge of feeling. And I think Radix does that really well, like for us to work on that pulsation and you know, getting them into their body, feeling what they're feeling, encouraging that. We live in such a society that doesn't encourage that, you know, just, you know, get on with it, hurry up. I grew up a lot with that. So, you know, so I love this feeling work, because it's like, wow, you know, feel, you know, and so the beauty is of this work that we're really encouraging this feeling, and deep feeling, you know, like that people have hidden away for so long, and, you know, to get angry and to get in the safety of our rooms, you know, and to use interventions that when we help the pulsation flow, we allow them to feel this, you know. I remember one lady, she never thought she had that much rage, you know, just got her to hit some pillows and, you know, on the mattress, and oh my goodness, what came out, you know, she never had. And then she just felt so much better, because all her life she just contained, you know, I'm a good girl, I don't do like this, and giving her that permission And then, of course, she went into deep sobbing about her life. So, you know, it's just, yeah, a beautiful way that we can help people really get to feeling their emotions and themselves, you know, and the pain of their lives. So I think it's just just wanting to add that as well.
I think one of the things that has stood out for me in terms of thinking about people in terms of their pulsation, and not everyone's a pure anything, we're all mixes and it depends where it goes, is the lack of value judgment around it, and how much it helps me understand different processes. As you know, coming from early childhood, someone may be a fear blocking structure if they didn't get that support in the very early years of their life. So as an adult, if all their charge and energy's in their core and they find it hard to sort of enact whatever it is they're wanting to enact, it helps me not see that, you know, they lack willpower or or they're deliberately, you know, going against me or something. It helps me see that, look, what they need to do is all their energy is in the core, and it needs to come out more into their periphery. And I, you know, learnt tools to do that. And when you can assist people to do that, you know, things get easier for them. They are able to do things a bit more. And so there's something about the lack of value judgment about it. And even when you work with couples, sometimes if you can explain in some ways that this is why, it's not this person's deliberately trying to do you in or go against you or something, but because of early childhood experiences, they've developed certain ways of managing their pulsation that isn't the same as yours and may create frustrations for you until you can understand why it's there. I don't know.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Brendan, I'm curious, how do you develop that skill of observation, self-observation? So clearly some people are going to get overwhelmed if their charge is brought out to the surface, and we're wanting people to notice, whether it's in couple or at work or at the grocery store. How do you develop an understanding of someone's pulsation in relationships?
Yeah, I was just reflecting on a couple that I'm working with at the moment, actually. And you know, what you said before about relationships, it's not easy to be in a relationship. It's not easy to develop emotional intimacy. It's not easy to put the hard work into those, you know, that regular coming together and expressing feelings and needs with each other. And so I think it's so valuable to have this Radix lens on relationships, because it can give couples the tools that they can take into their lives outside of the therapy room with them to be able to foster more emotional intimacy in the relationship and to communicate more effectively with each other, their feelings and needs.
So are you using that language with clients, like soft structure, pain structure? Are you teaching your clients?
So one example of a couple I'm working with at the moment, recently we identified that that he is a fear structure on the soft end of the continuum. And so he struggles to build charge. He's often sitting down on the couch on his phone, or you know, wanting to play games or do something like that that's not active. And his partner, she is much more active, and we've identified that rigid end of the continuum, the anger structure, who needs to be able to discharge and be active and to participate in activities together in order for her to be able to open up and hear him and hear his feelings and his needs and have that kind of emotional communication. So yes, I do use that language, and them understanding that pulsatory pattern was helpful to them, because one example of what they've been doing to help facilitate emotional communication with each other is she will work in the garden, which she loves, being active in the garden, doing things, and he may sit in the sun watching her in the garden while they talk. Then that helps him to charge up and to be able to open up to her, and that allows her to have enough discharge to be able to open up to him. So that's a practical example that they can take out of the therapy room.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great example. Well, let me check. That's just been such a rich dialogue. I'm going to, now's a good opportunity to bring in some questions if you have some, to either Brendan and Narelle about anything they've spoken about, or to the reflective panel. Answer the poll questions. Thank you. Yes, please. This is a great opportunity to have a quick look through the poll questions. I certainly had a reflection on when you were talking earlier about the early imprinting on the brain and that capacity to sit, not necessarily sit, stand, lie, with the eyes open, in touch, either touch of space or touch of sensory connection. Something so simple can be so exceptionally powerful and yet so excruciatingly hard for people to do. It's not something that they experience. So in Radix work, there's almost a necessity in a way to heal the unmet needs as well as work with the present. Because that understanding of being non-judgmental to myself about why I am who I am allows me, I guess, the courage and the willingness to make choices to move forward, knowing that without judgment, it's a skill I don't have.
Yeah. And Radix work provides people the opportunity to have corrective experiences.
Yeah.
The brain, while during a Radix session, the brain may go back to a time in their early attachment relationships where their needs weren't met in some way, or they have had some form of trauma. And yes, being able to work with therapeutic touch, with movement, sound, vision, different positions, lying on the mat, all of that can help facilitate a resolution to those experiences where that person didn't have their needs met in childhood.
Yeah. And that speaks to that coherent narrative. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's being able to revisit that and have another relationship with the other, which is relating to the other, as an adult. Yeah, quite powerful. I'm going to check in for final comments from either the keynote dialogue or reflective team.
Yeah, I think that a key point is to mention that our adult relationships often bring out a lot of our traumas and our triggers, and it's easy to get triggered in an intimate relationship context. So it's so powerful to be able to have a therapeutic approach that helps people to be able to have more of a sense of control and containment over reactivity in relationships, and to be able to take charge of yourself and your process and your traumas that you bring to a relationship, to be able to respond more effectively and to have more synchronicity in the relationship, and to be able to experience a deeper loving connection with that person.
Yeah.
I think on saying that, I think it takes both the people to work though, doesn't it? So not just one, because you can say, yeah, maybe you can go and work on yourself and, you know, and be less reactive to your partner and, you know, and just be more loving. But if the other partner's not going to do the work, then it's really tough.
That's actually a bit of a risk in doing Radix work, Helen, I think, for some couples, because one person might experience a lot of personal growth and
Yes.
do deep work. And if the other individual hasn't done that or is resistant to doing that, then that can cause
There's a
relationship.
clash.
Yeah, a clash.
Exactly. And a dissonance, you call it, or whatever. It's, you know, it's got to be both working, because it can be, well, it doesn't have to be, but it doesn't work so well, I think, if only one's doing the work and the other one's, you know.
Yeah.
Well,
saying
that
that
tells you
sometimes-
something, doesn't it? If only one's doing the work and the other one's not, you got more to work on in that session. Can each one of you answer Joanne's question? Can you please give me an example, a brief example, giving the time, but a thorough example of hands-on body work in session with couples? And it doesn't matter what type of, doesn't have to be an intimate couple. Could, I'm guessing, let's broaden it. Could be parent-child, could be friends, could be intimate. Give us an example of hands-on body work in session with couples.
I can think of one where you might have someone either receiving a comment from the other person, or attempting to express something themselves, and you might go and negotiate with the person, but put your hands on their back around the shoulder blades, so that they can feel that support. And it's, people really feel that so you'd play around with it until they can sort of let in and feel your hands supporting them at that point. That part of the body is often associated with support. That would enable them either to receive something that their partner's trying to tell them or their friend's trying to tell them, or would enable them to feel a bit more grounded and confident in being able to say what it is they have to say. Support being a missing link in their growing up, if you like.
And basic caveat is permission's always sought before any hands move towards anyone else. Yeah, that's often an explicit dialogue at the start of Radix work, is the right to say. Brendan.
Just the basic example that comes to mind is working with eye contact. Eye contact is super powerful in a couple session. So, often you'll notice they'll be talking to me as the therapist rather than to each other. And at, important points during the session to actually say, I just would like you to direct that to your partner and to see them as you say that, and for the other person to see them as they're expressing that. That can have very powerful impact on the couple, and often can get people into their tears and into their sadness and grief, and can really help to deepen the connection between the two of them. So working with eye contact is one of the most powerful things I think that we do in Radix.
Thank you, Brendan. Helen?
I was going to say, actually, the eye contact I would work a lot sometimes with that too, just, because a lot of people avoid that. So, but just on kind of looking at that, maybe working really gently too, especially if you've got a lot of fuse structure in there. People aren't always able to look. So you just got to go really slowly, and, if you just say, look at each other, sometimes it's really difficult for, especially a fear structure person to have the eye contact. So just working really, just gently, taking gentle breaths, going in a little bit when you're comfortable, then coming out even just for a little bit, and then having some eye contact was, I find some other couples they love the eye contact, and that's what's often lacking sometimes in one couple. He doesn't look at me, he doesn't see me. So it's like usually that anger blocker fear combination. And so if and the anger wants to be met, the anger blocker. So it's like, but the fear blocker may not be able to do it because of his own, be it her, fear and process. So of coming out. So just working, really being mindful of the structures and working with eye contact. So just as a follow-on, that's a very good follow-on from what Brendan was saying, going sometimes really slowly, not to overwhelm the person, because they can get overwhelmed with too much being seen, because they haven't been seen in their life. And suddenly someone's looking at them. It can be quite daunting sometimes, but it's very, very powerful when it's done slowly and gently.
Thank you, Helen. George, specifically an example of hands-on body work in session.
Yeah. Obviously, one-on-one is a lot there, but in couples, especially if I've seen them individually beforehand a little bit, then they're comfortable with that, especially if they're, like Narelle said as well, if they need that extra support to be able to speak up to their partner or be with the other partner's energy, the level. I may just hold their hand sometimes, just simple as that. They may just need just something there to feel that someone's there on their side, and go next to them or sit next to them, have shoulder to shoulder contact. And now have a look. Now is it easier to say what you want to say? Then I'll take a breath and poof, it'll come out, and it'll touch the other person as well. And then off we go. And there's a very beautiful exercise that we do in Radix work, and it does require the couple to be prepared, and there's an established relationship there. That's just a given with this answer. But where they can lie side by side, and one will take the hand of the other and place it on themselves. Genitals aside, it's in a safe place, and they can just feel the contact for as long as they would like. And then move that hand if they want that hand moved, or remove it altogether, and vice versa. And I think that's a very beautiful exercise between two people. It's very effective, and there's a lot of presence involved with it. Great, wonderful thank you to everyone tonight. Thank you, Brendan and Narelle, for bringing this amazing, rich topic and roundup forward. It was a really beautiful way to wrap up these 4 webinars. I feel really grateful. And Helen and George for your reflections. And of course, the wonderful backup by Gypsy there, who's been our co-host in the background with IT matters. I'd just really like to say a very, very big thank you. There's thank yous, Ruth. Thank you for the webinar, and great to learn more about Radix. And I hope everyone gets an opportunity to do the polls. Brendan, where to from here?
Well, as always, I would like to direct everybody to the Radix Australia website. The link is there on the screen. And at our website, you can access further information about Radix. You can find a practitioner in your local area if you're interested in therapy. You can also contact us about training if you're interested in training in the modality there. And also our YouTube channel, which is there with the handle Radix Somatic Psychotherapy. And on YouTube, we have all of the webinar recordings. The last 3, as well as this one, will all be available there for you to watch again if you want to.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Louise.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.